My name is Antara. My name is Antara. I have been a university level debater for many, many years. I have been coaching debate for the last 2 years. I was part of the Team India selections in 23 at National Camp in Chennai, hosted by ISDS. So I've been a debater for a while. Um, so this is what we're going to do today. First of all, if you guys have any questions for me at any point in today's debate, please don't unmute yourself. Put it in the chat. I will come to you. We're going to be doing types of motions. So it's going to be a slightly technical class. I would request that you all write these things down just so you don't sort of miss the nuances of what we are going to be doing today, right? The kinds of motions that exist in debate sort of remain the same at university and school level debating, right? So, whatever you study today, you get to use it for the next however many years you are part of the debating circuit, right? Um, with that, if you have any questions, wait for me to finish the part that I'm talking about. If your question is still not addressed, put it in the chat. We'll spend the last 10-ish minutes of today's class going over the motions, going over the questions, right? Aside from that, I'm also going to be one of your core adjudicators for the Harvard Invitationals. So I will also be seeing all of you in Jaipur, right? Okay. With that, then we'll start, right? I think largely you all are aware of what debate motions mean, right? And what they do. We have all debates exist at some point about things that are happening in the real world, right? So, what is the most important part in any debate speech? The most important thing is to show how things change on your side of the debate, right? Why is the world better off? But how do we get to this conclusion, and what are the things that we have to necessarily say in all debates, right? So, um, we'll start a little bit quickly with how to read a motion, and then we'll get on to policy debates, right? To start with, all motions you will see have the word this house at the beginning, right? So this house would ban smoking, or this house believes that schools have uniform, right? Two types of motions exist. Firstly, um, motions that talk about an action that can only be implemented by the government. This house would ban smoking. This house would make alcohol illegal, right? This house believes that the prime minister should stay in power for 10 years. These are all motions that can only be passed and can only be implemented by the government, right? So, in these kinds of motions, the word this house refers to the state or refers to the government in general, right? So, that's why anytime you're in a debate, you hear the word prime minister and leader of opposition, which are real roles in the parliament. So, these are the first kinds of debate in which you are the government. The second type of debates are a lot more neutral, right? They have to do with societal judgment. They have to do with um, a lot more opinions than a policy being implemented, right? This house would ban smoking, doesn't talk about if smoking is good or bad. It talks about should we ban it or should we let people smoke in public places. But an but a debate motion like this house believes that schools should permanently expel bullies has a lot more to do with how individual people think about it, right? So, what is a bully? Why is expelling the course of action? This is not a law. This is something individuals get to talk about, right? It's about society, it's about the lives we live. So, in these motions, the phrase this house refers to society as general, right? Every time you read a debate motion, every time you are in a debate, this is why it's important to read a motion a few times so you know what part of society or what arena of society you are talking about, right? Um, with that, hopefully being clear about what this house means, we'll get into the types of motions that then exist, right? Um, First up, and this is, I think, one of the most numerous kinds of motions that you guys get. It's a policy debate. What's a policy debate? Policy debates generally start with the words, this house would. What does it mean? in this house would or in a policy debate, you are always the government of a country. You are always the state, right? Why? Because in a this house would motion, you need to implement a law. You are making a change in society, and this change in society can only be made if a policy is passed and implemented, right? Which is why in this house would motions, side government always gives a model. What does this mean? So let's start with the most basic example, or and the first type of policy debates, which are this house would ban smoking, right? What does it mean in the motion this house would ban smoking? So, firstly, side government can give us a model or a policy which will explain how this motion happens, right? How are we going to be banning smoking? What does this look like? Does this look like a world where if you are caught smoking, you receive a prison sentence or do you get a giant fine, right? Will smoking be banned immediately? So if the motion passes, if side government wins the debate, does this mean that smoking is banned today and from tomorrow, if you are caught smoking or if you're caught with cigarettes, you go to jail, right? So, for example, in this debate, side proposition can say, well, for the next 1 month, we'll allow people to have cigarettes, but no more cigarettes will be made, right? We will not manufacture any more cigarettes. And after that, after the 1 month period, if you are caught with cigarettes, then you get to pay a fine. In a year, you get to, if you're caught with cigarettes, you go to jail, right? Another part that the model will address is what will happen to people who work in the tobacco industry, right? There are people who make cigarettes. There are people whose daily job it is to make cigarettes. So what happens to them? If side government in a policy motion chooses to give a model like this, if they choose to implement it as a policy, the debate becomes, can this policy be implemented, right? So what does opposition's job here become? It becomes, um, well, can smoking be banned the way side proposition suggests it? Is this a model that can be implemented in society, right? Opposition can give a counter model if they want. So they can say something like, they can say something like, well, we can regulate cigarettes, we can tax them higher instead of banning it, right? People have like the freedom of choice. They should be able to choose if they want a cigarette. So maybe instead of banning it, we should regulate it. We should make some laws about it, right? So the first kind of policy debate, side government gives a model, they give a policy, they tell us how this is going to be implemented, right? How does this happen? And they have to make it clear that this policy, how it will occur, how is this law going to be passed. Often you will have like a motion set which will make it clear what the policy is within the motion itself. So, for example, if you guys pay attention here, there is a motion, right? It says this house would require non-violent criminals to perform community service rather than go to prison, right? Then what both sides have to implement and argue about becomes clear within the motion, right? Side government has to argue for a world and argue for a policy where community service is what prisoners have to do versus side opposition, which has to necessarily give a policy on why these people have to go to prison instead, right? So policy motions often make it quite obvious within the motion itself what the debate is going to be about. Second, there are also motions that don't have the words this house would at the beginning, but they are still policy motions. What can these motions look like? So often they are motions to do with governments or with international policy, right? This house, as India, would put high tariffs on the United States, right? This is a policy motion. This is something only the government can do. And how the government will do it is a policy that has to be implemented. Even though it doesn't have the words this house would at the beginning, it's very clear to all of us that this is not a motion about what society thinks, right? This is about a motion on this is about an action the government has to necessarily take. So it sort of then becomes useful for side proposition to talk about what is part of the motion itself, right? What is a tariff? How are we going to implement it? Why are we putting it on the USA, right? So that's how policy motions work. If you guys have any questions about policy motions, write them wherever you're taking notes. Send them in the last 10 minutes of class, right? Then we have this house believes that motions. What is so this house believes that um, this house believes that homework is useless, right? So this is a motion where you have to pass a judgment. You have to tell me why. So this house believes that homework is useless. We're not performing an action, right? We're not doing anything. We are talking about whether or not something is important. What is the value of homework? Do we believe it's useful? Do we believe it's useless? What is our subjective thought process, our subjective opinion on homework itself? So, this type of motion does not require you to give any policy at all, right? Um, this house would ban labor unions is a motion that requires a policy. It's a policy motion. This house believes homework is useless. It does not require a policy setup, but it requires side proposition to talk about the values that exist within the motion itself, right? So this house believes that benevolent dictatorships are better than weak democracies. What does this mean? It means we would rather have a dictator who is generous and open to its people than have a democratically elected government that is weak in its implementation, right? That maybe can't pass policies, that can't really enforce laws, right? But in this motion, we are not talking about how we would put a dictatorship into power or how does a weak democracy work, right? We are talking about values. What is the value? A benevolent dictatorship versus a weak democracy, right? So you have to compare and contrast the kind of worlds that these are. Um, what kind of values are there? What exists? What do we believe in here, right? Why we believe this society would be better off? Not how it is done, but what it looks like. Um, then the second type of this house believes that motions are the ones that ask you to say one thing is better than the other, right? This house believes that parents should adopt children rather than having their own children, right? It clearly tells you what action we should do and what we should prefer over the other action, right? Any motion that says we would rather do X than Y, it necessarily comes from a neutral observer, right? Two people who don't have to implement a policy, who don't have to have this impact on their life, right? We're not saying this house as a parent would adopt a child, right? So this house believes that parents in general should adopt children instead of having their own. So it in this kind of motion, you necessarily have to talk about why it is in the interest of parents to do to adopt children over having their own biological children, right? So what are the benefits to the particular group of people that we are talking about? Why should why should parents adopt children over having their biological one? Why is it a duty to do one action over the other, right? Not why is it um, not why is it more important, but why is it more valuable? Why is it your duty to do something? Why it is important for you to do it, right? Um, so in this house believes that parents should adopt children instead of having their own biological children. As a debater, you will be required to show why parents have a duty to adopt these children. This duty doesn't have to be moral, right? It's morally beneficial to adopt children rather than having your own. It can be, but it can also be about other things, right? As citizens in a country, um, it is our national duty to make sure that all citizens have a loving home, right? And part of that is that we adopt unwanted children over having our own. So it can be a moral duty, it can be a patriotic duty, however that works for us, right? Um, so even if it's something that's beneficial to these parents, you still have to talk about why it is something they absolutely have to do. Side opposition obviously has to do the opposite, right? They have to talk about why it isn't your duty to do this thing, why it's not part of your responsibility, why it's not part of why it's not compulsory for these individuals to take this action, right? Um, if it's if it's a if it's a severe motion, like this house believes that student protests should necessarily be violent, right? You also have the duty to go ahead and show why student protests shouldn't be violent. So, not just that student protesters have a duty to be violent when they're protesting, but more importantly, why they have a duty to not be violent as well, right? So, side opposition, depending on the motion, has to run one of these cases, right? It depends on how hardline, how extreme the motion is in general. Okay, before we go on, if anyone has questions about policy or THPT motions, can I have them in the chat? I'll take 1 minute and then we'll move on to the next kind of motion. Okay, I'll go over that again. That's fair. Where's the structure? Okay, so the structure in forming a model or a counter model is always you have to show that this is a policy that can be implemented, right? Um, it is government fiat in a debate. So if the debate is this house believes that smoking should be illegal, side opposition can't argue that panel, it's impossible for the government to ever ban smoking because people will not listen to the government, right? This is not a debate that can happen. Why is this not a debate that can happen? Because if from the top we say, panel, this is not something that can exist in the first place, then there's no use in us having a debate, right? Then we might as well save all of us some time and go home. So then the debate has to be about why smoking shouldn't be illegal, right? This is to tell you guys what a model versus a counter model is. A counter model cannot be, panel, this cannot happen at all. The question is why it shouldn't happen. So, what is a model? A model looks like what will this policy be? How will it be, implemented? How is it going to change the lives of people? And a counter model is why shouldn't this policy exist? Um, okay. Yes, if you're the government or state, you have to talk about the implementation of measures. That's the debate that you are having, right? That's the point of the debate. What is a policy motion? Very quickly, in a policy motion, you as the government have to take an action. What does this action look like? This action looks like this house would ban smoking. How would we be banning smoking, right? That's a policy motion. So side government argues for a plan to go into motion, and side opposition argues that this plan shouldn't happen. So that is a counter model is side opposition saying why this shouldn't happen, and a model is the government explaining how this will happen. That is the difference between a model and a counter model. Yes, the counter model has to counter only the propositions model. You can propose a new model if you want, right? But you can't not rebut side government's model at all. If you don't engage with what the government is saying, then there's no point in the debate, right? If you're having a parallel debate, if you're not engaging with the arguments the other side is making, then the debate is redundant, right? Then we might as well not do it. The second type of this house believes that motion compares one action to another. So the first type of motion believes that panel, this house believes that X should happen, or X is a good thing, or X is a bad thing. So one side talks about why X is a good thing, one side talks about why X is not a good thing. The second type of this house believes that motion, that the panel, this house believes that X should do Y, right? So X is a person, an individual, a state, a government. This is the action X should take. This is the act they should do. This house believes that this house believes that governments should make personal cars illegal, right? This is an action that the government has to take. In a this house believes that motion that says X should do Y instead of doing anything else, you have to tell us why it is in the interest of X to do this thing. Why Does X have a duty? So why does the government have a duty to ban personal cars, right? What is important? Why is it important for the government to do this, right? Okay. I don't know what the red line on screen means. I did not put it there. Okay, cool. Let's move on to the next type of motions. So this house supports THS, this house opposes THO, this house regrets THR, right? We will go through all of them one by one. So first, you have this house regrets. This house regrets. Um, this house regrets the rise of private transportation. This house regrets reservation. This house regrets um, this house regrets the glorification of motherhood, right? So in all this house regrets motions, the actions on both sides are the same. Side proposition, side government has to tell us what a world where this house regrets reservations. So the government has to tell us that a world where reservations never happened would be a better world. This house regrets personal cars. So government has to prove that a world where people only use public transport and didn't have personal cars, this is a world that would be better for everyone to live in. This house regrets motions are always retrospective. What does this mean? You are always regretting something that has happened in the past, and you have to tell us that the world would be better off if this thing had not happened in the first place. Not that this thing should be stopped currently, right? That this house believes that everyone's cars should be taken away today, right? That's not the motion. The motion is that in the first place, people should not have been allowed to have private transportation, right? So, a world where this thing never happened is a better world. So there are a few compulsory burden on side government in a this house regrets motion. And if you don't fulfill these burdens, then the debate on your side is lacking, right? What are these motions? What are these burdens? So if this thing had never happened historically, the world would be better off. Status quo, the current society we live in, would be better off if this thing wouldn't have happened in the past, right? Firstly. Secondly, what would have happened instead if we lived in a world where personal cars were never an option? What would the world look like instead? So maybe you can say something like we would live in a world where public transportation would be a lot better than it is today, right? Because no one was allowed to have personal cars in the first place. Um, can I have the text stop coming in? I will ask you guys next time we have questions. So you have to prove to us that in a world where private transport never existed, um, that the counterfactual which you are giving, which is public transport would be better, is what would have for sure happened instead, right? That is the alternative, and that is the likely alternative. And secondly, that it is the preferred alternative. Not only is better public transport what would have happened, it is also what should have happened, right? It would make the world a better place. What does side opposition do then? Side opposition can challenge the likelihood of the counterfactual. Side opposition can say, panel, it's not that the government doesn't have incentive to improve public transportation today. What they lack is the willingness, which means we would live in a world where it would be increasingly difficult for people to go from one place to another because public transport would remain the same, which means in cities, in tier two cities that don't have public transport like the metro, it would be very difficult for people to travel from one place to the other, right? So this counterfactual would never happen. What side government is saying would not happen in the first place is the first case that side opposition runs. The second thing they run is that whatever the alternative is, it's also not desirable. It's also not that we what we would have wanted, right? So If public transportation had existed, if everyone has to take public transportation, you would need so many buses and trucks, etc., that just in general, traffic conditions would be worse than they are today, right? So even if what side government says comes true, it's a bad count world to live in, right? It is much worse than status quo is. Um, so also teams can make future arguments. You can say things like panel, if this is something that happens in the past, in the future, maybe we have much improved, like maybe we have bullet trains in countries like India, right? Like this is an argument you can make for the future. Similarly, opposition can counter it for the future, right? They can say something like, well, if bullet trains were to happen, they would have happened already. It's just more likely um, that people start protesting against the lack of public transport, etc. Things like that, right? So you can make past arguments compulsorily in a this house regrets motion, but future arguments also you can make optionally, right? So these are this house regrets motion. So you necessarily require a counterfactual. You necessarily require to discuss. You necessarily have to discuss what the world would look like instead, right? Obviously, you are creating a new world that exists in a this house regrets. Then you have motions that talk about opposing or supporting anything, right? This house supports the use of affirmative action in universities for racial minorities. What does this mean? This house believes that in countries where reservations, etc., happen on the basis of race and communities, we believe these reservations exist shouldn't exist, right? We believe we oppose their existence. This house opposes are motions that are sort of similar to this house regrets. But in a this house regrets motion, you talk about how this thing shouldn't have happened in the past, right? In a this house opposes motion, you talk about how it shouldn't happen in the current world. So in status quo, this is something that shouldn't be happening. So you don't go back in time and talk about a world where this never happened in the first place. You talk about status quo existing without it, right? So proposition here has the burden. The burden is not having to prove that affirmative action never existed or that affirmative action should immediately be taken away, right? This debate is a judgment. It's talking about the values of affirmative action as a policy, right? Why do we believe that it shouldn't exist in status quo? Not that now you don't need a policy to take it away. You need to talk about why it shouldn't be a thing that is happening in the world currently, right? On side government. However, in a opposes or supports motion, so supports motion also, um, this house believes that we should have affirmative action based on based on race in India, right? So you have to talk about why this is something we need in the current world. Why is this a change that we should make in society today, right? However, when you talk about a supposes or opposes motion, talk about what the world will look like in the future, right? What are the impacts of this? What does this policy do 10 years from now? Why is it important for us to do this, right? Um, Obviously, opposition can discuss why the world would be better off if the thing remains in place or if the thing never comes into existence in the first place, right? So, opposition can argue along the same line. Do we have any questions about supports, opposes, regrets? Okay, I'm assuming none, but I will wait another minute. You have to give credit to whom? You're not citing anything in a debate. A debate is not a research paper presentation. You read things and then you explain them or you implement them in your way. You can cite statistics in a debate. I would largely advise against it because a statistic is an example, it's not an argument. So why waste your time quoting statistics, right? If you're quoting statistics in a debate, it's also the judge is not writing it down, so it's not doing you any good. Okay, quickly then moving on to this house prefers, right? So, what is a this house prefers motion? What is a this house prefers motion? A this house prefers motion talks about why one thing is better than the other, right? This house believes that social media sites like Instagram and Facebook should be subscription based. What is subscription based? You have to pay a certain fee every month, the way you do for Netflix, over advertisement based. How social media sites today in status quo are advertisement based. So they make money based on the ads that they show to us versus platforms like Netflix, which make money because we pay a certain membership fee every month, right? So in a model where you have to talk about why you prefer X over Y, you have to talk about the alternative setup in your world. So in this house prefers social media sites that have a subscription model over an advertisement model. Government necessarily has to support a world where social media sites are subscription based. So they have to tell us why this is a good alternative. Why is this something that we want, right? You can't create a new world. You can't be like, well, subscription based, but if you want, you can pay a membership fee, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too. You necessarily have to tell us why the alternative that the motion says your side has to do, why is it that is the better thing to do. You can't create a new alternative or say that, I think there should be a mix of both. This can't happen. So proposition then in this motion has to argue that I don't know how to stop people scribbling on screen. Is this something that a co-host can get on? Yeah, okay. Um, So you have to argue on side proposition that social media sites which rely on subscriptions as a mean of profit are better, they are preferable, that's what we want. And the opposition has to argue that social media sites based on advertisements are better than those have a subscription, right? So this house prefers X over Y is a pretty straightforward motion. The motion itself tells you what case you have to make, right? The second type of this house prefers motion doesn't give you an alternative. It just says this house prefers a world where social media sites have subscription, right? It doesn't say what the alternative is. In these types of motion, side opposition has the policy they have to defend. What is the policy they have to defend? Status quo, what the world looks like currently. Because if you have a this house prefers X kind of motion, whatever it says that we prefer is something that doesn't exist in society at the moment, right? It's the opposite of whatever we have going on. This house supports a world without passports, right? We currently live in a world where passports are required, right? Status quo, you need a passport to travel internationally. So, side opposition has to defend the current world we live in which you need passports. Side government has to defend whatever they are preferring within the motion itself, right? Um, so, it's sort of evident again within the motion itself what this looks like, right? Um, Opposition can also argue that panel status quo is changing, and however status quo is changing, that's what we want instead of whatever government wants, right? Please ensure you don't end up arguing on the same side of the motion that the other team is, right? Don't end up accidentally supporting the same policy side government is supporting. Um, Then you have this house prefers a world in which X happens, right? This house prefers a world where social media sites run on subscription based model. How does this differ from the earlier two types? Right? So the first one, it gives you a clear comparative. We want a world where subscription-based social media sites exist. So if you go on Instagram, you have to pay a monthly fee of 500 rupees instead of, the ads that we see on Instagram itself, right? So it tells you this is A, this is B, we want A over B. It's evident. In the second one, it just says this house prefers social media sites based on a subscription model. This house wants A, right? No alternative. The last site, um, so the last site in this house prefers a world in which this happens, right? This house prefers a world where social media sites run on subscription based model. What does this mean? It me it means that teams have to prove a world in which social media sites did not run on subscription based model is a preferable world to status quo. That's what we want in the alternative. What really makes type 3 different is that, like this house regrets motion, these are retrospective, right? You have to tell us how the world would have progressed or how the world would have changed had social media sites been subscription based in the first place. So, what does this mean? Maybe it can mean that, we will have a lot fewer people on Instagram, right? The way more people are on Instagram than people who use Netflix, right? Because Instagram is free. Similarly, we'll have like fewer people on Insta, and that's the kind of world we want to live in, right? Um, so opposition can't argue that panel if we start having these social media sites be subscription based, people will protest. Why will people not protest? Because this is how they have always existed, right? They have always existed as a paid app, as a paid application. The way no one protests that, oh, why do I have to pay a Netflix fee, right? That's just how it works. It's always required you to pay a fee, right? Um, okay. Uh, Hopefully this is clear, but in all prefers motion, uh, you have to tell us why one thing is better than the other and whether the other is a new policy that you have to go through or um, or like a world that you have to create, right? So whether it's status quo or a new world that you imagine alternatively, it's always talking about why one thing is better than the other, right? Again, asking OC if we can somehow stop people from editing this. I'm not sure how this works. Uh, oh yeah, okay, that should be good. Cool. Then you have actor motions. Actor motions are one of the simplest kinds of motions, right? I'll quickly, yes, if you are giving a model or a counter model, or if you are doing a retrospective comparative, all of these things have to be proposed from the first speaker in a debate itself. So your model can't come out at your second speaker. Your model should start with your first speaker. So your second speaker can explain it more, but your first speaker has to put it into place, right? It can't be a new thing because simply on-site government, it will leave you very little time to go ahead and actually set it up. But it also means if you wait, then side opposition can't really counter it, right? Same thing on side opposition. If you say it at second speaker, the government only has the whip to go after you. So it will be very difficult for side government to make a case against it, right? Okay, cool. Then we have so start start giving your model or start talking about your alternative from the first speaker itself. Don't It can't be something that comes out in second speaker, but even if the second speaker can explain it more, it you definitely can't have anything new in the third speaker's arguments, right? So you have to get your entire model out by your second speaker. Your third speaker can issue clarifications, but they can't set it up for you in the first place. Okay, then we have act emotions. Um, Then we have act emotions. What are act emotions? Sorry. Yeah, what are act emotions? So in act emotions, you are always a person or a group of people. This house, as Shah Rukh Khan, would quit Bollywood. So you are Shah Rukh Khan, and you have to talk about why quitting Bollywood is beneficial for you. In an actor motion, the debate happens from the perspective of the actor in the motion itself. You are having this debate not from the point of view of society or community. You are not a neutral observer. You are not the government. If the motion is this house as Shah Rukh Khan would quit Bollywood, you are in this debate as Shah Rukh Khan, right? So one side talks about why it would be your up to you, your benefit, it would be beneficial for you to quit Bollywood. The other side would talk about why it would not be beneficial for you to quit Bollywood. For this example, I'm assuming all of you know who Shah Rukh Khan is, right? If you don't know who Shah Rukh Khan is, I don't know how to help you. Um, ask anyone, I guess. So all arguments in this debate, it's not about why it would be better for society if Shah Rukh Khan quit Bollywood. It's not about why it would be better for anyone else. It only has to talk about why it would benefit this actor in the first place, if this action happens, right? So all arguments in this debate have to talk about either the interests or the benefits or the harms that will happen to the person that this debate is happening as. Why should this actor quit Bollywood? Why should this actor not quit Bollywood? What are the benefits? What are the harms, right? This house, as a parent, would not send their children to a private school. As a parent, what are your interests? I want my child to do well in life. I want my child to have a successful career. I want my child to have a good social circle. I want them to figure out their potential and live up to it, right? So these are my interests. Would doing this action benefit my interests or would it harm my interests, right? So side government can talk about, well, the quality of education in private schools might be better, but side opposition can say, panel, this would really harm the way these kids view society, right? Because they're very out of touch of what the real world looks like in a private school. It's a lot more expensive, which means fewer kids have access to it. Um, this debate, it doesn't mean that the actor is selfish, right? It's not that, well, I want to make a lot of money, so I think it would be better if I, as Shah Rukh Khan, quit Bollywood and start, I don't know, being an investor, right? You have to explain to us what are the principles of this actor? What are their interests? How are you benefiting them? So, in the parent motion, for example, the debate happens from the point of view of the parent, not from the point of view of society in general, right? So, this house believes that the government should ban smoking. That's not an actor motion. This house believes that parents shouldn't send their children to private schools. That's not an actor motion. This house, as X, is an actor motion. So um, you can still claim that the interests of the parent should be prioritized, but if it's a THBT motion, you have to talk about it as a neutral observer, right? So you have to talk about it in this debate. What are the interests of these parents? How are we fulfilling these interests in our side of the house? Is that clear? Yes, it was a joke. I'm assuming everyone does know who Shah Rukh Khan is. We live in India. Um, and no political debate in the chat box. Your opinions on Donald Trump are yours to have in private. Okay, so in an actor motion, it's all about benefiting the specific actor. It's not about society or status quo or the past. It's about how this one actor is going to be influenced, why their life is better off, right? It's about nobody else. Okay, do we have any questions about actor motion? We'll take a minute. Cool. I'm assuming we are good then. Uh, yeah. Okay. Any questions then about anything we've done so far? So these are your types of motions. You have policy debates. Policy debates come in two types. One is the obvious, this house would ban smoking. Another is this house, um, this house believes that the US, right? How do you tell a policy debate is a policy motion? It is always an action that the government has to perform. It's an action that requires the government to implement a policy. You can have a model, you can have a counter model. Counter models are not necessary, but you should. always try and have a model in a policy motion, right? Tell us how this happens and tell us why this happens. uh, what if we don't know about the actor? In an actor motion, you are told who the actor is within the motion itself. It's not hidden from you. So it'll tell you this house acts as XYZ, and XYZ is the actor. Actor motions are obvious. If it doesn't tell you who the actor is in the motion, it's not an actor motion. It's another kind of motion. Then you have this house prefers. So this house prefers X to Y. You have to tell us why one thing is better than the other. This house prefers only X. You have to talk about why X is better than status quo. Other side has to talk about why status quo. Status quo is just the world we live in, right? So why is it that the world we live in is better than X? Then you have this house prefers a world in which X happens. This house prefers a world in which X happens is about what this policy should look like. And also, this is something that has happened from the beginning. So it's a retrospective motion, right? It's always been like this. Then you have this house regrets, retrospective motions. You have to give a counterfactual. So you have to talk about what the world would look like if this thing had never happened in the first place, right? This house regrets reservations. So what would the world look like if we didn't have reservations in the first place? This house opposes or supports something. So they are a little bit like regrets motions. The only difference is that they are not in the past. Opposes and supports happen in the present time, happen in present society. So you have to talk about why this thing should either happen or not happen in status quo. What is why is one better than the other, right? What are the harms and benefits? So it's largely a pro and cons debate, right? Um, Prefers, we've discussed. Actor motions, you identify what the debate is about within the motion. It's about a particular actor. You can be an individual, you can be Shah Rukh Khan, you can be a group of people, parents as a whole. You can be the government of a particular country. This house, as the government of Italy, would ban tourists. So, in this case, you are an actor, you are the government of Italy. What are the interests of the government of Italy, right? You can be a committee, you can be like this house as the external ministry of India would external affairs ministry of India would suspend all active passports, right? What are the incentives of the external affairs ministry? Why would suspending passports work in their favor, right? Obviously, and the largest group of motions, this house believes that smoking is bad. This house believes that alcohol should be illegal. These are, in general, pros and cons motions. They are analysis motions, and if you read them deep enough, they usually fit into um, a greater group of motions in general, right? So, reading this house as XYZ is always an actor motion. This house as anyone is always an actor motion. This house as the government of Italy is also an actor motion. Obviously, in this, you will have to give a policy, right? How are we going to be banning these tourists? But you are the actor. What actor are you? The government of Italy. What are your interests? I want to keep my citizens happy. I want to keep my economy booming, right? Um, Currently in Europe, if you guys read the news, and I can't stress enough how badly you need to read the news to be a good debater, you will know that there are anti-tourist protests that are going on in Europe, right? So what do these look like? Um, what are our incentives, right? Okay. However, this house as the government of XYZ is a very rare motion, right? It really usually doesn't happen. Can I have cameras on, please, for everyone? And if you guys in general have any questions, you can raise your hand about types of motion itself. Only raise your hand, not unmute yourself. If you unmute yourself, I will mute you, and then that will be embarrassing for both of us. Um, so let's not go there. If you have any questions about the debate itself, things like how a round's going to be starting or what the debate will look like, these are questions that you can direct to Ideal. These are not questions for today. For today, the only questions you guys get to ask me are on the types of motion itself. So if you have any of these questions, please raise your hand. This house, as the country of XYZ, is a motion type that you are very unlikely to face. It's not something you should worry about at all. But you can have a motion like this house as parents, this house as students, this house as university graduates, etc. Right? Okay, cool. Any other questions that you guys have? Uh, what does a judge see the most in content? We see that your argument is complete. Saying one line, this house believes that smoking should be illegal because smoking is bad for your health. That's not an argument. I'm not writing that down. You have to give me a complete argument. Why does it matter that smoking is bad for my health? Why shouldn't individuals be allowed to choose things that are bad for their health, right? So make sure that your arguments are complete. Make sure you're not giving the judge incomplete arguments in a debate, right? There are no number of arguments. It's always about the quality of arguments. If you have 15 arguments and they're really bad quality, versus if you have two arguments that are really good quality and are written well and are linked very well to the motion, a judge will give the win to the person who has the two arguments, right? It's about debating is always about quality over quantity, right? So when I say you guys should read the news, I mean you should read a few good articles every week. Try reading two articles from The Economist. Try reading the editorials in the newspaper. Don't start by trying to read the whole newspaper at once, right? Start with limited quality arguments. Okay. No, the presentation will not be shared. I think you guys, I'm not sure, you might get a recording, but I'm not 100% sure about it. Cool. Any other questions? I think we are done then with time to spare. Are we all clear on the types of motions? Do we all know the burdens we have to fulfill in a debate? Will we make sure we fulfill those burdens? Yeah. If you have a this house regrets motion, don't treat it like a policy debate. Okay. Make sure that you actually talk about why this thing should have been changed from the past, etc. Right? Okay. Great. I think then we are done. Avinash, should I end the meeting?